Welcome to another edition of Todd Talk, where we take teaching theory and turn it into teaching practice. The theme for this month's Todd Talks is going to be social emotional learning. So our episode today is going to be specifically looking at what social emotional learning is so that you have a better understanding of it so that you can use this practice in your classroom. So first question is, what is social emotional learning? So social emotional learning breaks down into usually 5 aspects, as you can see here. So the first one of these is self-management. So this is that students are able to manage their emotions so they don't get too angry or too frustrated with when they're working in groups. Is this how this might manifest itself sometimes? It could be that they're perfectionist, and so they have difficulty getting work in because they want it to be perfect. But basically, it's managing your own emotions and not letting those emotions get in the way of you performing to the level that you're able to perform at. And so it is important for students to be able, and adults, to be able to self-manage themselves. Now, of course, with our younger students, this is probably more difficult than it is with older students because of maturity issues. And we tend to, younger students tend to show their emotions or wear their emotions on their sleeve a little bit more. But again, it's teaching them how to self-regulate this rather than punishing them or, there being repercussions for them not doing it. Giving them strategies for how they can manage their own emotions, whether it's counting down from 10, whether it would be going outside in the hallway and taking, a breather. Could be several things that you use to try to calm a student down. So that's self-management. The second aspect of social emotional learning is self-awareness. And this is just being aware of your own strengths and weaknesses. And I see this a lot in the classroom with kids who think they have to know things that they don't actually know. And so they will act as though they do, when in fact they could use help on that. So where this becomes an issue is if a student thinks that they are really good at something, and so they take on that challenge and they're not willing to listen to anyone's help because they think they know what they're doing. And then they run into trouble and they don't know how to cope with this kind of or this problem that has arisen from this assignment. So it's having a self-awareness. And so where you can see this is students who think they're great leaders, but really they're just bossy. So they see it as one way, but others see it another way. I often equate the self-awareness to what I call the American Idol syndrome, which is that people go on the show American Idol and they sing and they think that what they've sung is beautiful and it's really well done, and the judges have looks on their faces as though they've been tortured, and it's not really good at all. And everyone sees this but the person. And so this happens with students in the classroom. They think they're really good at something, when in fact they may be overselling themselves or misinterpreting how good they are at a certain skill. So being able to recognize, a student being able to recognize this is going to be helpful, because when they do recognize what their strengths are, they're able to work with those strengths and they're able to, overcome and thrive with those strengths. At the same time, you recognize one's weaknesses and then you figure out ways to work around those weaknesses. So if your weakness is that you're a procrastinator, then coming up with strategies such as a calendar or keeping a book, a date book that allows you to keep on top of things would be a good way to develop, that weakness but you have to have a self-awareness of this. The third part of social emotional learning is responsible decision making. So this is just doing the right thing. So they say that, it's when you are given the opportunity to do something that's not right and you still choose to do the right thing, that is truly being responsible. And so we try to teach this to students all the time. Like there are things you can and cannot do. There are things that are socially accepted and not socially accepted. And it doesn't necessarily have to be rules either. It can be, whether a child picks their nose. There's no rule that says you can't pick your nose, but socially speaking, this is not usually accepted. So it's learning personal and social behavior and what is appropriate and what is not. And again, this goes back to that kind of self-management and being able to regulate this yourself, to whereas a kid doesn't have to be reminded all the time. Now, the younger kids might have to be reminded more than others, but by the time they get to a certain age, the expectation that students will have this But some students don't. And so you have to make sure that you are giving them the help with learning how to make responsible decisions and how to, do the right thing and what that looks like. The fourth aspect of social emotional learning is relationship skills. So this is how well do they work with others in a collaborative setting? How well do they make friends? How well do they deal with conflict with others? And so this can definitely come up a lot in the junior high with, mean girls and, bullying and, there's cyberbullying now. So there's all sorts of things. Where kids are really dealing socially and emotionally with a lot more things than perhaps we might have been in years past, or we're just more aware of these issues. But as a teacher, there's certainly things that you can do to help kids to learn how to collaborate with others. There's things you can set up in your classroom. There's norms that you can create. There are activities that you can do. And also when it comes to forming friendships, there are things that schools can do, such as a buddy bench, which I've seen, which is a bench that someone goes and sits on when they need a buddy, and someone will come over and then be their buddy. And so there are lots of things that you can do with students. But again, to assume that students who are younger are the only ones who need such a social emotional learning would be remiss, because there are a lot of kids who are older who do have relationship skills issues, especially when they get into high school and they start dating people. The relationship becomes there's another facet to that relationship. So I'm not saying that we have to play love doctor. We have to fix their relationships with their girlfriends or boyfriends. But again, knowing how to appropriately respond to this relationship when it goes sour, or knowing what is the right thing to do, as opposed to letting your emotions get the best of you, can be something that's really important to learn. The last aspect of social emotional learning is social awareness. And this is just being aware of others around you and how the power that your words have. So sometimes people will say things that they don't intend to be a certain way, but it's taken that way because of the way it's delivered, or the tone, or the way it was, spoken to that person. And so the social awareness just means being aware of others around you and reacting to that. So this could be something as simple as a student that gets up and throws something away in the middle when someone is speaking. They may not be aware socially that this is really not acceptable. You need to be considerate of the speaker and listen to the speaker and throw it away, whatever you need to throw away later. It could be being aware of others and the way that they react to you, or the way they show understanding. And this could be how it also manifests itself is, do students show empathy for others? So when a kid is having a bad day, do they just kind of put that off as being drama, or are they sympathetic to that person and show empathy towards them? So these aspects of social emotional learning typically have been solved in the home. So when kids come to school, we're mostly focusing on the academics, but more and more we're starting to get into the understanding of social emotional learning is something that can be taught in schools and should be taught in schools, because that's where they're doing a lot of the collaborating and working with others and having relationships and having social situations. And so you can see over my shoulder the quote, we must Maslow before we blooms. And I'm going to get into Maslow and Bloom's in a little bit, but what this means is we have to meet the social emotional needs of students before we can meet their academic needs. So this is why there's an increased level of awareness in schools of being able to meet the needs of students. And you can see in this chart here, that sure, the family and community definitely do a lot of to build this social and emotional learning, but schools need to do this as well with school-wide practices and policies. So whether this is an anti-bullying, or whether this is, like I said, the buddy bench that you set up, or situations that you set up where you allow kids to work on their social and emotional skills. In the classrooms itself, this is something that can be done. And I think the difference is that we've always done social emotional learning. It's just not been real obvious to students. So you might, a student may do something and you have a brief conversation with them, or you kind of nudge them in a certain direction, but they're not aware that the social emotional learning is taking place. So now we're just being more transparent about this, and we're being more intentional about the social emotional learning and what that looks like. So when I talked about you must meet, Maslow before you can blooms. Maslow are the needs of human beings, and there are 5 of them. So the first one is um, psychological needs. So do you have food, shelter, clothing? Those ones, although we assume that students have this sometimes they don't. And I would, or I'm sorry, the physiological needs. And one thing I would add to that is like things that we assume that students might have, such as internet access at home when we give an assignment. But this is just physiological needs that students need in order to be functional. So if a kid comes in and he looks like he hasn't got much sleep, this would be a lack of physiological needs. Whether kid comes in and wears the same pair of clothes for days on end, this is a physiological need. So physiological needs are typically easy to spot. And so, but the question is, are you doing anything about that? Are you making efforts to try to help students who come in and lack these physiological needs? Safety needs is the next thing. And this is really important in the schools, because schools should be a place where kids feel safe, where they feel safe not only physically but mentally. So they're safe from bullying. They're safe from being chastised by their teachers. There are some teachers that can step over the line and emotionally bully students without even realizing they're doing that. And so we need to make sure that our classrooms are places where kids both have the mental and physical space in order to feel safe. And so they know that coming to school, it's a safe place to be. And because of that, they want to be at school. Love and belonging is another one. And this is just, in the school, the way this manifests itself is friendships. So, and this can also manifest itself in the way the teacher relationship is. So personalized learning is becoming really big, a big movement in education. But again, it's something that's been around for a while. We just weren't giving it a name. But this is basically feeling as though your teacher cares about you. Not that they love you necessarily, but that they care about you, and they care about your success, and they care about your needs, and they care about your issues. And so it's important as teachers that we form these relationships with students so that they feel like as though we care about them, and that we actually do care about them, and we are willing to help with that. The next level of Maslow's is esteem. So this is self-esteem. So you feel good about yourself, you feel confident to accomplish something, and you have the strength in order to work forward with this. And so this is having respect for others. So it's not just yourself, it's others as well. So do you show respect towards others? Are you known as someone who's respectful, and not a false respect, but you're just respectful to people in general. The last one is self-actualization. And this is definitely important in school. And this is the desire to become the most that one can be. So as teachers, we are constantly trying to get students to reach their potential. And that's what the self-actualization involves, is recognizing what a student is capable of doing and then getting them there. Some students won't try to reach their potential. They just are satisfied with doing the status quo, or the average. And so as teachers, we have to recognize what the potential of our students are, and then help them to reach that potential. But it is self-actualization. So it is helping them to recognize this themselves, so that they do have the potential to do something. And so that's Maslow. So those have to be met before you can start to teach the content to students, before you can assess them, before you can expect them to be able to do academics in your classroom. Because we do find that a lot of students have issues with their academics because they're not having their social emotional needs or their Maslow's needs met. And so where this kind of bunches up with Bloom's is, as you can see here, is if a kid feels as though their Maslow's hierarchy of needs have been met, then they're going to be willing to go up the pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy, to whereas they're not just understanding and applying something, but they're able to take it to a higher level of thinking. They're reaching that self-actualization, the potential that they have, and they're able to analyze and evaluate and create. And so what analyzing, evaluating, creating does, it doesn't necessarily mean that the question is more difficult, or the situation is more difficult. It just means it's accessing a different level of thinking. So it's making them think about something and come up with something that's original, rather than just reciting back something that they've heard. So that is social emotional learning. And so there will be further Todd Talks to talk about what you can do in your classroom to practice these needs. But first and foremost, is just to make sure that students are aware that you care. Care about them, you care about your classroom, you care about yourself, and you care about your content. If students feel as though you care, then you're going to be able to meet their Maslow's needs a lot more, and as well be able to meet their academic needs or Bloom's needs as well.